Sometimes the things we chase the hardest leave us the emptiest inside. For 30 years, Martin Hale had everything money could buy, but had lost everything that money couldn't. The successful investment banker returned to his small hometown of Cedar Falls to close one final deal, buying up a struggling neighborhood to tear it down for luxury condos. It was supposed to be simple business, nothing personal. But as he walked those familiar streets, calculating profits and planning demolition, he met someone who would change everything. A 7-year-old girl named Anna was giving away homemade bread and tiny Bibles to her neighbors. Her clothes were worn, her shoes had holes, but her smile could light up the whole block. When Martin asked why she was giving away food her family probably couldn't spare, her answer stopped him cold. What she said next would bring a millionaire to his knees and force him to choose between the fortune he built and the man he used to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather Bible sat on Martin Hale's mahogany desk like an accusation. Its worn burgundy cover bore his name in faded gold letters, a gift from his grandmother on his confirmation day 43 years ago. He hadn't opened it in decades. Yet somehow it had survived every office move, every upgrade, every purge of sentiment from his increasingly sterile life. Now, as rain drummed against the windows of his Manhattan penthouse, the book seemed to mock the empire he'd built around it. Martin pushed back from his desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. At 58, he cut an impressive figure, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His reflection stared back at him, successful, powerful, utterly alone. The silence of his apartment was broken only by the soft hum of climate control and the distant rumble of traffic 30 floors below. The Cedar Falls project file lay open on his desk, aerial photographs showing the 12-block area he'd soon own. The neighborhood looked tired even from above, aging houses with patched roofs, narrow lots where children's toys scattered across brown lawns. It wasn't personal, he told himself. It was business. These people would receive fair compensation more than their properties were worth. Honestly, they'd find better places to live. The luxury condominiums would revitalize the area, bring jobs, increase tax revenue. Everyone would benefit. Everyone except the families who'd call those houses home. Martin shook his head, annoyed at the unwelcome sentiment. 30 years on Wall Street had taught him that emotion was the enemy of good business. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, watching lesser men make fortune-ending mistakes because they let feelings cloud their judgment. His success came from seeing opportunities others missed, from making the hard choices others couldn't. It's what had built his $200 million portfolio. It's what had made him one of the most respected investment strategists in the country. It's also what had cost him everything else. The framed photograph on his desk showed a different Martin, younger, softer around the edges, holding a gap-toothed 5-year-old girl with pigtails. Sarah had been the light of his world then. Every evening, he'd rushed home from his entry-level position at a small investment firm to read her stories, help with homework, listen to her chatter about kindergarten adventures. Elena would have dinner waiting, candles lit, classical music playing softly from the stereo they bought secondhand. Those had been lean years, but rich ones. Their apartment was cramped, their furniture mismatched, their car a decade old. But they'd had each other. They'd had hope. They'd had faith that hard work and love would be enough. Martin closed his eyes, remembering Sunday mornings at St. Andrew's Lutheran in Cedar Falls. He'd grown up in those pews, listening to Pastor Morrison speak of grace and redemption, of loving your neighbor as yourself. His parents had been simple people, his father working the family farm that had been in the Hale name for 4 generations, his mother teaching 2nd grade at the local elementary school. They'd given him values more valuable than money: integrity, compassion, The belief that success meant lifting others up, not climbing over them. How far he'd fallen from those teachings. The first compromise had seemed so small. A client wanted insider information about a pending merger. Martin had overhead partners discussing it. Nothing official, nothing illegal. Sharing it wouldn't hurt anyone, and the commission would help him provide better for his young family. Elena had just learned she was pregnant again. They needed the money. But the pregnancy ended in miscarriage, and somehow the money felt tainted. Elena grew distant, questioning choices they were making. She wanted to move back to Cedar Falls, near family, where they could raise Sarah with grandparents and cousins, and the kind of community values they'd both known as children. Martin had refused. Cedar Falls was the past. New York was the future. He was building something important, something that would give his family security their parents never had. He just needed Elena to trust him a little longer. The compromises grew larger. The commissions grew bigger. The late nights stretched longer. Sarah started asking why Daddy wasn't home for bedtime stories anymore. Elena started sleeping in the guest room. By the time Martin realized he was losing them, the pattern was too established to break. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday in November 21 years ago. Sarah was 17 then, already accepted to Stanford, already making plans for a life that didn't include her father. She'd chosen her mother's maiden name for college applications. The message was clear. Martin had thrown himself deeper into work, telling himself that success would prove he'd made the right choices. He'd built his own firm, attracted elite clients, made millions. He'd bought the penthouse, the houses in the Hamptons and Aspen, the yacht he never had time to use. He dated beautiful women who understood that his work came first, who didn't ask for more than he could give. But late at night, in the silence of his perfectly appointed apartment, he wondered what he'd really accomplished. His wealth felt hollow. His achievements, measured only in dollars, seemed meaningless. He'd gained the whole world and lost his soul, a phrase that would have made him roll his eyes 20 years ago, but now felt like prophecy. The Cedar Falls project had seemed like poetic justice when it first crossed his desk 6 months ago. His hometown had struggled economically for years. Young people left for bigger cities. Main Street storefronts stood empty. The proposed development would bring new life to the area, create jobs, attract young families back to the community. But as Martin researched the project, he discovered the target neighborhood was Millbrook, the area where his grandmother had lived, where he'd spent countless summer afternoons helping her tend her garden and listening to her read Bible stories. On the front porch swing, the house was long gone, sold after her death to pay medical bills. But the memories remained, buried under layers of ambition and disappointment. His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. The caller ID showed his assistant's name. "Mr. Hale? I have the final contracts for the Cedar Falls project. The sellers have all agreed to terms. You'll just need to make the site visit for final approval. Then we can close next week. Thank you, Patricia. Schedule the trip for Thursday. I'll drive up, spend the night, complete the inspection Friday morning." "Of course, sir." "Will you need the usual hotel arrangements?" Martin paused, looking out at the glittering city lights. "Actually, book me at the Cedar Falls Inn. It's time I got reacquainted with my roots." After ending the call, Martin returned to his desk and picked up the old Bible. Its pages fell open to a passage he'd once memorized for Sunday school. "For what shall it profit a man, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" He closed the book quickly, but the words lingered. Tomorrow he would return to Cedar Falls for the first time in 15 years. He would finalize the demolition of a neighborhood filled with families like his own had once been. He would add another few million to his portfolio and return to his empty penthouse. It was just business. It had to be, because if it was anything more than that, Martin wasn't sure he could live with what he'd become. The rain continued to fall against the windows. each drop like a tear for the man he used to be. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed midnight. A new day was beginning, though Martin couldn't yet imagine how completely it would change everything he thought he knew about success, failure, and the true meaning of wealth. The leather Bible remained on his desk, patient as a prayer, waiting for the moment when he might finally be ready to remember the faith he buried beneath decades of ambition and regret. That moment was coming sooner than he could possibly imagine, carried in the small hands and pure heart of a 7-year-old girl who still believed in miracles. The autumn air in Cedar Falls carried scents Martin had forgotten he remembered. Burning leaves, wood smoke from chimneys, the earthy smell of fields preparing for winter. He'd arrived the previous evening, checking into the Cedar Falls Inn without fanfare. The desk clerk, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, had recognized his name from the reservation, but showed no sign of remembering the Martin Hale who'd grown up here decades ago. Now, walking the streets of Millbrook at 8 in the morning, clipboard in hand, Martin felt like an intruder. The neighborhood was quieter than he'd expected, older than the aerial photographs had suggested. Many of the houses showed their age-peeling paint, sagging porches, yards that struggled between seasons. But there were signs of life and hope, too. Children's bicycles leaning against porch railings, flower boxes still holding late blooming, mums, Halloween decorations beginning to appear in windows. Martin paused in front of 412 Maple Street, checking his notes. This property, like most in the neighborhood, would need significant rehabilitation to be profitable as rental income. The mathematics of demolition made much more sense. Clear the lots, build modern condominiums, attract young professionals, willing to pay premium prices for new construction with downtown convenience. He was calculating square footage when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, mister. Would you like some bread?" Martin turned to see a small girl approaching him with careful steps. She couldn't have been more than 7, wearing a faded denim jumper over a white blouse that had been mended at the elbow. Her dark hair was pulled back in 2 simple braids, tied with yellow ribbons, and her brown eyes held the kind of earnest sincerity that made adults instinctively smile. She carried a wicker basket lined with a checkered cloth. The aroma of fresh-baked bread wafted up from beneath the covering, warm and inviting in the crisp morning air. "I'm sorry?" Martin lowered his clipboard, genuinely puzzled. "Bread," the girl repeated, lifting the cloth to reveal several small loaves wrapped in wax paper. "Grandma Rose and I made it this morning. We're sharing it with neighbors who might be hungry." Martin looked around, suddenly aware that he was being watched from several porches. An elderly man watering plants nodded at him. A woman hanging laundry on a line smiled warmly. This wasn't the desperate neighborhood he'd imagined from his office in Manhattan. "That's very kind of you," he said carefully, "but I'm just here on business." "I don't live in the neighborhood." The girl's face lit up. "Oh, that's perfect then. You might not know where to find good bread around here." She reached into her basket and pulled out one of the small loaves, offering it to him with both hands. "It's whole wheat with honey. Grandma Rose says honey makes everything better." Despite himself, Martin found his lips twitching into an almost smile. "I can see that philosophy has merit. But really, I couldn't take your bread. You made it for your neighbors." "Jesus fed people before he preached to them," the girl said matter-of-factly, as if stating an obvious truth. "Grandma Rose says love always comes first, then words. Empty stomachs can't hear full hearts." Martin stared at her, momentarily speechless. The simple theology delivered with such innocent certainty struck something deep in his chest, a chord he hadn't felt vibrate in years. "That's a beautiful sentiment," he managed. "Did your grandmother teach you that?" Some of it comes from here." She patted a small Bible tucked into her basket alongside the bread. The book was clearly a child's edition, colorfully illustrated, well-worn from handling. I read a little bit every morning before we start baking. It helps me remember why we're doing it." Martin glanced at the Bible, and for a moment he saw his own childhood faith reflected in this girl's shining eyes. When had he stopped reading Scripture in the morning? When had he stopped asking why he was doing what he was doing? "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Anna Marie Patterson. I live with Grandma Rose in the blue house with the swing." She pointed down the street to a small cottage with weathered siding and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. But the yard was neat, the windows clean, and sure enough, an old porch swing moved gently in the morning breeze. "It's nice to meet you, Anna Marie. I'm Martin. Are you here to help fix up the neighborhood?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. "Some people came by last week asking lots of questions about our houses." They had clipboards too. Martin's stomach tightened. Those had been his advance team conducting preliminary assessments. "Something like that," he said, the half-truth tasting bitter in his mouth. Anna beamed. "That's wonderful." Grandma Rose always says this neighborhood has good bones. It just needs some tender, loving care. She says everything worthwhile does. The phrase hit Martin like a physical blow. Good bones. Tender, loving care. When was the last time someone had spoken about anything in his life needing care rather than replacement? Anna Marie. An older woman's voice called from the direction of the blue house. "Don't wander too far, sweetheart." "That's Grandma Rose," Anna explained. "She worries because she can't walk as far as she used to. Her legs hurt when it gets cold." She leaned closer to Martin, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "She needs surgery, but surgeries cost lots of money. So I pray extra hard for her. Every night. I'm sure that helps," Martin said softly. "Oh, it does. Prayer always helps, even when we can't see how right away." Anna reached into her basket again, this time pulling out one of the small Bibles. "Would you like one of these too? They're not as filling as the bread, but Grandma Rose says they last longer." Martin stared at the little book she offered him. Its bright blue cover showed Jesus surrounded by children, all of them smiling. The simplicity of the image, the pure joy on the painted faces, made his throat tight. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that." Anna tilted her head, studying him with surprising intensity for such a young child. "Grandma Rose says God doesn't make mistakes about who needs what when. If you're here, and I'm here, and I have an extra Bible, maybe that's not an accident." The words hung in the air between them, weightier than a child's simple logic should have been. Martin found himself reaching for the little Bible, his hand shaking slightly as he took it. "Thank you, Anna Marie." "You're welcome, Mr. Martin." She grinned up at him. "Will you be around tomorrow? We usually make muffins on Fridays. Blueberry, when we can get the good berries." "I don't know," Martin said honestly. By tomorrow he should be back in Manhattan, contracts signed, demolition scheduled. This neighborhood, this little girl, this moment of unexpected grace would be nothing but a memory. "Well, if you are, you know where to find us." Anna adjusted her basket and began walking toward the next house, the blue house with the swing. Grandma Rose always makes extra, just in case. Martin watched her go, this small figure in a faded jumper carrying bread and Bibles to neighbors who probably had as little as she did. She moved with purpose, with joy, with a certainty about her mission that he envied more than he wanted to admit. He looked down at the little Bible in his hands, then at his clipboard full of property assessments and demolition schedules. The contrast felt obscene. For the first time in 30 years, Martin Hale wondered if he'd chosen the wrong side of an equation. And for the first time in just as long, he wasn't sure he had the strength to fix it. Martin spent the rest of Friday morning walking the neighborhood in a daze, Anna's words echoing in his mind with each step. The little Bible remained clutched in his left hand while his right mechanically made notes on his clipboard foundation issues. Roof repairs needed, electrical systems that hadn't been updated in decades. But the numbers felt hollow now, stripped of their usual power to reduce human complexity into simple mathematical equations. By noon, he found himself standing in front of the blue house with the swing. The cottage was smaller than he'd estimated from a distance, probably no more than 800 square feet. The porch sagged more noticeably up close, and several of the roof shingles were missing or curled with age. But someone had taken care. With small details, the porch rail had been recently painted white. Flowers still bloomed in window boxes, despite the October chill, and that swing moved invitingly in the gentle breeze. As he stood there, trying to reconcile the house's obvious need for repair with Anna's obvious happiness, the front door opened. A woman emerged slowly, using a carved wooden cane for support. She had to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a floral house dress that had seen better decades but was still clean and pressed. "You must be the gentleman Anna met this morning," she said, her voice warm but cautious. She came home quite excited about sharing her bread with someone new. "Mrs. Patterson?" "I'm Martin Hale." He climbed the 3 steps to the porch, noticing how the woman winced slightly with each movement. "Your granddaughter is quite remarkable." "That she is." Rose Patterson's eyes crinkled with genuine affection. "Please, call me Rose. Would you like to sit for a moment? I was just about to have some tea, and these old legs appreciate any excuse to rest." Martin knew he should decline, should finish his property assessment and drive back to Manhattan. His partners expected his report by Monday morning, and he had calls to return, emails to answer, an empire to maintain. But something in Rose's manner, gentle yet dignified, welcoming despite obvious financial struggles, made him nod. That would be nice. Rose disappeared inside, moving slowly but refusing his offer of help. Martin settled into the porch swing, surprised by how comfortable the old wooden seat felt. From here, he could see most of the neighborhood children playing in yards, neighbors chatting over garden fences, an elderly man carefully raking leaves into neat piles. It felt like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, wholesome and timeless. The recipe box Rose carried out when she returned was clearly handmade, its wooden sides decorated with painted flowers that were fading but still cheerful. She set it carefully on a small table beside 2 steaming mugs. "Anna tells me you're here to help fix up the neighborhood," Rose said, settling into a wooden chair with obvious relief. "That's wonderful news. We've been praying for someone who could see the potential in this old place." Martin's stomach clenched. "Mrs. Patterson, Rose, I should clarify something about why I'm here." But Rose continued as if she hadn't heard him, opening the recipe box with reverent care. "This belonged to my mother, and her mother before that. 4 generations of family recipes, remedies, and little prayers written on scraps of paper." She pulled out a yellowed index card covered in faded handwriting. "This one is for Anna's favorite bread, the honey wheat she gave you this morning." Martin leaned forward, despite himself, reading the careful script. In the margin, someone had written, "Made with love for the Hendersons after baby Timothy was born 1952. "Every recipe in here tells a story," Rose continued, pulling out more cards. "This apple pie recipe, I made 12 of these when the Johnsons' house caught fire in '84. Everyone pitched in to help them rebuild. This soup recipe saw us through Mrs. Chun's husband's funeral. This cornbread fed the whole neighborhood when the O'Brien boy came home from Vietnam." She looked up at Martin, her eyes bright with memories. "You see, Mr. Hawley, a neighborhood isn't just houses and property lines. It's connections. It's people taking care of each other. It's children like Anna learning that love means action, not just feeling." Martin set down his tea mug with hands that weren't quite steady. "Rose, I need to tell you something. I'm not here to fix up the neighborhood. I'm here to—" He stopped, the words sticking in his throat like sawdust. To what, dear? To buy it. All of it. For development. The words came out in a rush. I represent investors who want to purchase every property in Millbrook, demolish the existing structures, and build luxury condominiums. Rose went very still. The only sound was the gentle creak of the porch swing's chains and the distant laughter of children playing. I see, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. And Anna doesn't know this? No one knows yet. We wanted to complete our assessment before making public announcements. Rose nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the recipe box. May I ask why you're telling me now? You could have simply finished your evaluation and left. Martin looked down at the little Bible still in his hands. Because your granddaughter asked me if I was here to help. And when she gave me this, she said God doesn't make mistakes about who needs what when. And what do you think you need, Mr. Hale? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Martin realized he'd been asking himself that same thing since Anna had spoken those words about Jesus feeding people before preaching to them. What did he need? More money? He had more than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. More success? He'd already achieved everything he'd once dreamed of and more. I don't know, he said honestly. I thought I needed this deal to close. I thought I needed to prove I could still see opportunities others missed. But sitting here, looking at your recipe box, listening to you talk about neighbors, helping neighbors, I'm not sure what I need anymore. Rose reached across the small table and patted his hand gently. That's the beginning of wisdom, you know? Admitting we don't have all the answers. But I do have all the power in this situation, Martin said, his voice heavy with the weight of that responsibility. I can make this deal happen, or I can walk away. Either choice affects dozens of families, including yours. Including Anna's, Rose said quietly. Yes, including Anna's. Martin looked toward the end of the street where he'd first encountered the little girl with her basket of bread and Bibles. She thinks I'm here to help make things better. And aren't you? The question was simple, but Martin felt the complexity of 30 years of choices, compromises, and calculations pressing down on him. In the distance, he could hear Anna's laughter mixed with that of other children. Innocent, trusting, believing in a world where strangers showed up to help rather than to harm. I used to think I knew what better meant, he said finally. Now I'm not so sure. Rose smiled, and for the first time since he'd arrived in Cedar Falls, Martin felt like someone truly saw him. Not his wealth, not his reputation, not his power, just him. The man who'd once been a boy in this very neighborhood, listening to his grandmother read Bible stories and believing that good always triumphed over evil. Well, Rose said, closing the recipe box with gentle care, maybe that's exactly where you need to be. Martin returned to his hotel that evening with his mind in turmoil. He'd extended his stay through the weekend, telling his assistant he needed more time for a thorough property evaluation. But the truth was more complicated. He couldn't bring himself to leave. Couldn't force himself to file the report that would set demolition in motion. The faded photograph he'd carried in his wallet for 15 years lay on the hotel nightstand. Beside Anna's little Bible, the picture showed him holding 5-year-old Sarah at a company picnic, both of them laughing at something outside the camera's frame. She'd been wearing a yellow dress that day. He remembered because Elena had spent 20 minutes getting a grass stain out of it after. Sarah had insisted on rolling down a hill. His daughter would be 31 now. Married, according to the private investigator's report he'd commissioned 2 years ago. Living in Portland, working as a pediatric nurse. She'd kept her mother's maiden name Richardson, even after marriage. The message was unmistakable. Martin picked up his phone, scrolling to a number he'd never had the courage to dial. Sarah's number. Before he could change his mind, he pressed call. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, older but unmistakably hers. Hello? Sarah, this is Martin. Your father. Silence stretched between them like a chasm 20 years in the making. Dad. Her voice was carefully neutral, professionally polite. Is everything all right? Mom said you never called unless there was an emergency. No emergency. Martin stopped, unsure how to bridge the distance his choices had created. I wanted to hear your voice. Another pause. In the background, he could hear children's laughter, the domestic sounds of a life he'd forfeited for quarterly profit reports. Okay, Sarah said finally. How are you? I'm in Cedar Falls. Do you remember Cedar Falls? Of course. Grandma and Grandpa's place. We used to visit when I was little. Her voice softened slightly, before you got too busy for family trips. The words stung because they were true. I met a little girl here today. She reminded me of you at that age. Dad, what's this really about? Martin looked out his hotel window at the quiet streets of his hometown. Streetlights had come on, casting warm pools of light on sidewalks where children had chalked hopscotch squares and parents were calling kids in for dinner. I'm here on business, a development deal. But this little girl, she gave me bread and a Bible, and she said something that made me think about choices I've made, about what I lost while I was building what I thought I wanted. Sarah's voice was quiet when she replied, And what did you lose, Dad? I lost you. The admission came out as a whisper. I lost your mother. I lost myself somewhere along the way. You didn't lose me, Sarah said, and there was pain in her voice now, old hurt surfacing. You chose your work over me? There's a difference. You're right. Martin closed his eyes, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time how his priorities had poisoned everything precious in his life. I thought providing for you meant earning more, achieving more, climbing higher. I thought if I could just succeed enough, you'd understand why I missed your school plays and birthday parties, and you kept climbing even after Mom and I stopped asking you to come down. The words hit him like a physical blow. Yes, they sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of missed opportunities settling between them. Dad, why are you telling me this now? Because tomorrow I have to make a decision that will affect dozens of families. Good people. People like we used to be, before I forgot what that meant. And I realized I don't want to be the kind of man who destroys communities for profit anymore. And you are that kind of man? Martin thought about Anna's trust, Rose's dignity, the recipe box full of stories about neighbors caring for neighbors. I have been, for too long. What's the decision? Whether to proceed with a development that will displace these families, or walk away from millions of dollars and probably destroy my business relationships in the process. Sarah was quiet for so long Martin wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke. Do you remember the story you used to read me about the fisherman and the businessman? Martin's throat tightened. He'd forgotten that Sarah remembered those bedtime stories. The businessman tries to convince the fisherman to expand his operation, build a fleet, create a fishing empire, and the fisherman asks why. And the businessman says so he can eventually retire and spend time fishing and enjoying life with his family. Sarah continued. And the fisherman says, that's what I'm already doing. Martin finished the story, understanding flooding through him. I became the businessman, didn't I? I spent 30 years building an empire so I could eventually have what I already had and lost in the building. Yeah, Dad, you did. They talked for another 20 minutes carefully, tentatively, but more honestly than they had in decades. Sarah told him about her work at the children's hospital, about her husband David who coached Little League, about the baby they were expecting in the spring. Martin found himself crying as she spoke, mourning all the milestones he'd missed, all the ordinary precious moments he'd traded for extraordinary emptiness. When they hung up, Martin sat in the hotel room darkness for a long time, thinking about fishermen and businessmen, about little girls who believed in miracles, about grandmothers who collected recipes and prayers in wooden boxes. Around midnight, he walked back through Millbrook. Most houses were dark now, families settled in for the night. But porch lights still glowed, welcoming any neighbor who might need help. In the blue house with the swing, a single window showed, the warm light of a reading lamp. He could imagine Rose sitting beside Anna's bed, reading a bedtime story or helping with prayers for all the people they'd met that day, including him. Martin pulled out his phone and opened his email, typing a message to his business partners. Need additional time for property evaluation. Will provide full report Tuesday. Some complications have arisen that require careful consideration. It wasn't much of a delay, but it was something. A small rebellion against the relentless pace of profit and progress that had driven his life. For so long, as he walked back to the hotel, Martin realized he was praying for the first time in 20 years. Not for success or profit or vindication, but for wisdom. For the courage to choose what was right over what was profitable. For the strength to finally become the man his daughter could be proud of. The man Anna already believed him to be. The little Bible in his pocket seemed to pulse with possibility. A reminder that redemption was always available to those brave enough to reach for it. Saturday morning found Martin sitting on a bench in Millbrook Park, watching Anna tend to a small community garden with several other neighborhood children. The plot was no bigger than most suburban driveways, but it bustled with activity. Tomato plants still bore late-season fruit, pumpkin vines sprawled along the edges, and neat rows of lettuce and spinach promised fresh greens despite the approaching winter. The weathered wooden sign at the garden's entrance read Millbrook Community Garden, planted with hope, tended with love, shared with joy. Below the words, children had painted flowers and vegetables in bright, cheerful colors that had faded but not disappeared over several seasons. Mr. Martin. Anna spotted him and waved, her small hands dirty from pulling weeds. Did you come to help? Mrs. Chun says we need to harvest the last tomatoes before the frost comes. Before he could answer, Anna had grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the garden. Mrs. Chun, a tiny woman in her 80s, looked up from where she was carefully cutting herbs and smiled broadly. Anna's been telling everyone about the nice man who's going to help fix up the neighborhood, Mrs. Chun said in accented English. We are very grateful. This community needs someone who understands how special it is. Martin's chest tightened with guilt, but he found himself accepting the basket Anna thrust into his hands. What do you need me to do? For the next 2 hours, Martin did something he hadn't done since childhood, worked with his hands in soil that didn't belong to him, for people he barely knew, with no expectation of profit. He picked tomatoes still warm from the morning sun, helped bundle herbs that Mrs. Chun would dry for winter cooking, and listened to stories about the garden's history. My husband and I started this garden 15 years ago, Mrs. Chun explained. As they worked, after he retired from the factory, he missed having something growing. We asked the city if we could use this empty lot, and they said yes. Soon, other families joined. We share seeds, share harvest, share recipes. Share everything, added Anna, who seemed to be the garden's unofficial ambassador. When the Thompson family lost their jobs last year, they still ate fresh vegetables, because everyone pitched in. And when Mrs. Martinez's husband was in the hospital, we made sure she had soup vegetables and healing herbs. Martin watched Anna carefully place perfect tomatoes in his basket, her concentration complete, her joy obvious. This child lived what most adults only talked about: genuine care for others, service without expectation of return, faith demonstrated through action. Anna, he said carefully, what will you do if the garden has to move someday? She looked up at him with those serious brown eyes. Why would it have to move? Well, sometimes land gets sold for other purposes. development, new buildings. Anna considered this with the gravity of a child processing adult complexities. Then we plant somewhere else, I guess. Gardens aren't really about the dirt, Mr. Martin. They're about the growing. And people can grow anywhere, as long as they have love and hope and good seeds. A simple wisdom hit him harder than any business presentation ever had. Gardens aren't about the dirt. They're about the growing. Around noon, Rose appeared at the garden's edge, moving slowly but carrying a large pitcher of lemonade and a plate of sandwiches. Thought you hard workers might be getting hungry, she called. The children swarmed her like puppies, accepting food with easy gratitude. Martin hung back, still struggling with the deception that felt heavier each passing hour. Mr. Hale, Rose said quietly as the children settled on benches to eat. Could I speak with you for a moment? They walked to the far edge of the garden, where an old apple tree provided shade and privacy. Rose set down the empty pitcher and studied Martin's face with the perceptiveness of someone who'd lived long enough to read hearts as well as expressions. You're carrying a heavy burden, she observed. Heavier than when we talked yesterday. Martin looked toward Anna, who was sharing her sandwich with a younger boy who'd apparently forgotten to bring lunch. I talked to my daughter last night. First time in years. That's wonderful. How did it go? She helped me see some things about myself that I'd been avoiding. Martin picked up a fallen apple, turning it over in his hands. Rose, what I told you yesterday about the development project, it's worse than I let on. My company doesn't just want to build condominiums. They want to eliminate affordable housing in this area entirely. Price out families who've been here for generations. Rose was quiet for a long moment, watching Anna help Mrs. Chun bundle the last of the herbs. And you have the power to stop it? Yes, but stopping it would likely end my career, cost me relationships I've spent decades building, probably destroy my company. But not stopping it would destroy something else. A community, families, children like Anna, who deserve to grow up somewhere that believes in gardens and neighbors helping neighbors. Rose nodded slowly. That's quite a choice. I keep thinking about what Anna said yesterday that Jesus fed people before preaching to them. That love comes first. I've spent 30 years doing the opposite, preaching about economic development and market forces while ignoring the human cost. It's never too late to change course, Mr. Hale, isn't it? I'm 58 years old. My daughter barely speaks to me. I've built my entire identity around being successful in ways that apparently don't matter. Rose smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. Do you know what Anna prays for every night? Martin shook his head. She prays for everyone she met that day. By name, she prays that they'll have enough food, enough love, enough hope. She's been praying for you since yesterday morning, asking God to help you with whatever's making you sad. The words hit Martin like a physical blow. This child, this pure-hearted little girl, was praying for him, believing in him, trusting that the stranger with the clipboard might actually be there to help. She doesn't even know my last name, he whispered. She doesn't need to. Love doesn't require a formal introduction. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Anna organize the other children to help clean up the garden. She moved with natural authority, not bossy but genuinely caring, making sure everyone participated and everyone felt valued. She's going to be a remarkable woman someday, Martin said. She already is a remarkable little girl. The question is whether she get to grow up in a place that nurtures that kind of heart. Martin understood the gentle challenge in Rose's words. Anna's future and the futures of all these children rested in his hands. The weight of that responsibility was crushing and liberating at the same time. For the first time in his adult life, Martin Hale was going to have to choose between profit and people. And for the first time in his adult life, he wasn't sure he was strong enough to make the right choice. Sunday morning arrived with a crisp clarity that seemed to mirror Martin's growing sense of purpose. He'd spent a restless night at the hotel, alternately reaching for his phone to call his partners and pulling back, knowing that once he made the call, there would be no undoing what followed. The sound of church bells drew him from his hotel room and on to the streets of Cedar Falls. He hadn't planned to attend service, hadn't set foot in a church in 15 years, but his feet seemed to carry him automatically toward the familiar steeple of St. Andrew's Lutheran. The small church looked exactly as he remembered it from childhood. Red brick, white steeple, wooden doors that had welcomed generations of families seeking comfort, guidance, and community. A simple sign announced, "All are welcome. Pastor David Morrison, Sunday service, 10 a.m. Morrison." Could it be the same Pastor Morrison who had confirmed Martin 43 years ago? The man would be ancient now, but Martin remembered his gentle wisdom, his ability to make Scripture feel relevant to a restless teenager more interested in baseball than baptism. As Martin hesitated at the church steps, he heard a familiar voice call his name. "Mr. Martin." Grandma Rose, "Look." Mr. Martin came to church. Anna bounded up the steps, wearing a blue dress that had clearly been carefully mended and a bright smile that needed no repair at all. Rose followed more slowly, dressed in her Sunday best, a navy dress and matching hat that had probably been elegant 20 years ago and remained dignified now. "How wonderful," Rose said warmly. "Anna was hoping you might join us this morning." Before Martin could explain that he'd only intended to walk by, Anna had taken his hand and pulled him through the doors. The sanctuary was smaller than he remembered, maybe holding 80 people at capacity. Today it was perhaps half full, mostly older congregants with a sprinkling of young families. They settled into a pew near the middle, Anna between Martin and Rose. As the organ began playing the opening hymn, Martin felt transported back to Sunday. Mornings when faith had been simple, when right and wrong seemed clearly defined, when he believed without question that God had a plan for his life. The pastor who emerged from the vestry was indeed ancient, probably in his 80s now, with white hair and a slight stoop. But his voice was still strong, his eyes still sharp with intelligence and compassion. "Today we explore the parable of the rich young ruler," Pastor Morrison began, and Martin felt a chill of recognition. A man who had accumulated great wealth came to Jesus asking what he must do to inherit eternal life. Jesus told him to sell everything he had, give to the poor, and follow him. The man went away sad because he had great possessions. Martin forced himself to keep breathing normally. As the pastor continued, "This isn't a story about the evils of wealth, but about the danger of allowing possessions to possess us, about choosing what we accumulate over what we are called to become." Anna leaned against Martin's arm, listening with the rapt attention that children reserve for stories they instinctively understand are important. Her small hand found his, warm and trusting. "The rich young ruler's tragedy," Pastor Morrison said, his voice growing softer but more intense, "wasn't that he was wealthy. It was that he couldn't imagine himself as anything other than wealthy. His identity was so tied to his possessions that losing them felt like losing himself." Martin's throat tightened as the words found their mark. Wasn't that exactly what he'd become? A man so defined by his financial success that he couldn't conceive of any other version of himself? After the service, Pastor Morrison greeted congregants at the door with the same gentle presence Martin remembered from childhood. When he reached Martin, the old pastor's eyes widened with recognition. "Martin Hale, my goodness, how long has it been?" "Too long, Pastor Morrison. I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "Remember you?" "Son, I remember every child I've confirmed. I remember you asking me if it was possible to be successful and faithful at the same time." Pastor Morrison's smile was knowing. "Have you found your answer?" Before Martin could respond, Anna tugged on his jacket. "Pastor Morrison, Mr. Martin is here to help fix up our neighborhood. Isn't that wonderful? Pastor Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly, and Martin felt heat rise in his cheeks. Actually, Pastor, that's not exactly. Perhaps we could talk, Pastor Morrison interrupted gently. I'd love to hear about what brings you back to Cedar Falls after all these years. 20 minutes later, Martin found himself in Pastor Morrison's small study behind the sanctuary. The room hadn't changed, still lined with theological books, still cluttered with papers and coffee cups, still radiating the kind of peaceful chaos that comes from a life devoted to caring for others. Rose Patterson called me yesterday, Pastor Morrison said without preamble, settling into a worn leather chair. She's concerned about something but wasn't specific. Said you might need someone to talk to. Martin stared at his hands, surprised by Rose's perceptiveness and care. I'm not the person Anna thinks I am, Pastor. I'm not here to help the neighborhood. I'm here to destroy it. He told Pastor Morrison everything. The development deal, his company's plans, the families who would be displaced, his own crisis of conscience. The old pastor listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, his weathered hands folded in his lap. So you have a choice to make, Pastor Morrison said when Martin finished. And you're afraid of making the wrong one. I'm afraid of making the right one, Martin corrected. I know what's right. I've known since Anna handed me that bread and asked if I was there to help. But doing what's right means losing everything I've spent my life building. Everything? Martin thought about his empty penthouse, his failed relationships, his estranged daughter. Everything I thought mattered. And what do you think matters now? Martin looked out the study window toward Millbrook, where families were probably gathering for Sunday dinner, where Anna was likely helping Rose prepare their modest meal, where neighbors still looked out for each other the way communities were supposed to. Those people, that little girl who prays for strangers, Rose and her recipe box full of stories about neighbors helping neighbors. The community garden where children learn that growing things is about more than dirt and seeds. Pastor Morrison smiled. Then you know what you need to do? But what about my company, my reputation? 30 years of building relationships and trust? Martin, do you remember what I told you at your confirmation? Martin shook his head. I said that God often asks us to choose between the kingdoms we build for ourselves and the kingdom we're called to serve. The choice is always ours. But the cost of choosing wrongly isn't losing what we've accumulated. It's losing who we're meant to become. As Martin walked back toward his hotel, Anna's little Bible warm in his pocket, he realized that Pastor Morrison had given him the same gift Anna had: truth delivered with love, challenge wrapped in grace, an invitation to become something better than what he was. The choice was still his to make. But for the first time since arriving in Cedar Falls, Martin Hale knew exactly what that choice would be. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Martin's hotel room. He was packing his belongings, preparing for what he knew would be the most difficult conversation of his professional life, when a knock interrupted his thoughts. Standing in the hallway was a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and a determined expression of someone accustomed to fighting uphill battles. She wore a simple business suit and carried a well-worn briefcase that had seen better decades. Mr. Hale? I'm Catherine Walsh, legal aid attorney for Cedar County. Could I speak with you for a few minutes? Martin invited her in, curious but wary. Catherine declined his offer of coffee and got straight to the point. I represent several families in the Millbrook neighborhood who have concerns about recent property acquisition attempts. I've been researching the legal basis for your development project. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. What I discovered is quite interesting, and I believe you need to see this before you proceed any further. Catherine spread several papers on the small hotel room table. At the top was a photocopy of what appeared to be a very old document, its edges yellowed and text faded but still legible. This is the original deed for the land that comprises most of the Millbrook neighborhood, Catherine explained. dated 1887. It shows that Jeremiah Millbrook donated 12 acres to the city of Cedar Falls with very specific stipulations. Martin leaned closer, struggling to read the ornate handwriting. Catherine pointed to a particular section, highlighted in yellow. Right here. The land was donated for the perpetual use of working families and their children, to be maintained as affordable housing in perpetuity, with ownership never to be consolidated under any single private entity for commercial development. Martin's blood went cold. That would make the current sale illegal, Catherine finished. Any attempt to purchase the entire neighborhood for private development would violate the original deed restrictions. The city never had the legal authority to approve such a sale. Martin sank into the hotel room's single chair, his mind racing. How is this possible? My legal team conducted extensive due diligence. They would have found this. Catherine's expression was grim. That's what I thought too, so I dug deeper. She pulled out another set of documents. These are the city records that your legal team would have accessed. Notice anything? Martin studied the papers. They showed standard property records, zoning, information, tax assessments, everything his team would have needed to verify the legality of the purchase. But there was no mention of the original deed restrictions. The original deed was filed separately, in a different record system that was discontinued in the 1950s, Catherine explained. Most of those old documents were supposedly transferred to the current system, but some were lost in the transition, convenient for anyone who might benefit from their disappearance. You're suggesting this was intentional? Catherine pulled out one more document, a letter on city letterhead dated 6 months ago. This is from the city manager to your development partners, acknowledging receipt of their consulting fee for helping to expedite the approval process for the Millbrook project. Martin read the letter twice, feeling sick. The consulting fee was substantial enough to motivate someone to ensure that inconvenient legal restrictions remain buried in forgotten filing systems. Who else knows about this? He asked. Besides me? A few families in the neighborhood who hired me when they started getting pressure to sell. And now you. Catherine gathered the documents back into her briefcase. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Martin stared out the hotel window toward Millbrook, where he could see Anna's small figure helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries up his front steps. My partners, do they know about the deed restrictions? I believe at least some of them do. The consulting fee letter suggests coordination with city officials who would have had access to the original records. The implications hit Martin like a physical blow. He'd been set up. His reputation, his relationships, his trust in people he'd worked with for years, all of it built on a foundation of deception. His partners had used him as the public face of a project they knew was legally questionable, positioning him to take the fall if anything went wrong. Why are you telling me this? Martin asked. Why not just file an injunction and stop the project that way? Catherine's expression softened slightly. Because I've been watching you this weekend. I've seen you at the community garden, at church, talking with families in the neighborhood. Anna Patterson told my client, Mrs. Chun, that you were the nice man who was going to help fix things. That little girl believes in you, Mr. Hawley, and frankly, so do I. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. There's something else you should know. The Patterson family, Anna, and her grandmother, they have the strongest legal claim to their property. Rose's husband was Jeremiah Millbrook's great-grandson. Their house sits on land that was specifically designated to remain in family hands. After Catherine left, Martin sat in the empty hotel room for a long time, staring at his phone. His partners expected a call by noon with his final assessment and approval to proceed. Instead, he was looking at evidence that they'd deceived him, used him, and planned to profit from a fraudulent scheme. But more than that, he was looking at a chance for redemption that went beyond his own salvation. The original deed didn't just protect the neighborhood from development. It affirmed what Anna and Rose and every family in Millbrook already knew. This wasn't just a collection of houses and property lots. It was a community created by intention, protected by law, sustained by love. Jeremiah Millbrook had been a man much like Martin once was: successful, wealthy, powerful. But unlike Martin, he'd chosen to use his resources to create something lasting, something that would benefit generations of families long after he was gone. The deed restrictions weren't legal technicalities. They were a gift from the past, a reminder that true wealth meant investing in people rather than profit. Martin thought about Anna's words from that first morning. Jesus fed people before preaching to them, because love always comes first. Jeremiah Millbrook had understood that principle. He'd provided the foundation, literally and figuratively, for love to flourish in this small corner of Cedar Falls. Now Martin faced a choice that would define not just his future, but his character. He could expose his partner's deception and protect the neighborhood, but doing so would almost certainly destroy his business relationships and financial standing. Or he could stay silent, claim ignorance, and walk away from the whole situation. While families lost their homes to an illegal scheme, the little Bible Anna had given him lay on the nightstand beside his phone. Martin picked it up, letting it fall open randomly. His eyes landed on a verse highlighted in yellow crayon. "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" Anna had marked this verse. This 7-year-old child, who shared her family's meager bread with strangers and prayed by name for everyone she met, had found this passage important enough to highlight. Martin reached for his phone. But instead of calling his partners, he dialed a different number. "Catherine, it's Martin Hale. I want to help you stop this development. All of it. And I think I know exactly how we can do it." For the first time in 30 years, Martin Hale was about to choose justice over profit, community over personal gain, love over law. The cost would be enormous. The reward would be everything. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, legal research, and careful planning. Martin had checked out of the hotel and was staying in Rose's spare room, a tiny space that had once been Anna's playroom but now served as her grandfather's study. The walls were lined with books about farming, community organizing, and local history, along with faded photographs of Cedar Falls from decades past. Martin worked late into Tuesday night, coordinating with Catherine Walsh to build a comprehensive case against his own development project. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was using skills honed over 30 years of closing deals to systematically dismantle the biggest deal of his career. "The key is timing," Catherine explained during a late-night strategy session at her cramped legal aid office. "We need to present the evidence publicly before your partners can claim ignorance or shift blame. And we need to make sure the families affected understand their rights under the original deed." Martin nodded, reviewing the documents spread across Catherine's desk. "What about the city officials who took the consulting fees?" "We have proof of their involvement. That's phase 2. First, we save the neighborhood. Then we deal with the corruption that threatened it." Catherine looked up from her laptop, where she'd been drafting legal briefs. "Are you prepared for what this will cost you personally?" The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Martin thought about his penthouse, his investment portfolio, the business relationships that had defined his adult life. Then he thought about Anna sleeping peacefully down the hall, trusting that the world was fundamentally good, that adults could be counted on to protect what mattered most. "I've already lost everything that really counted," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to find out what I can build instead of what I can accumulate." Wednesday morning brought unexpected reinforcements. Martin was helping Anna feed the chickens in Rose's small backyard coop when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in years. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was hesitant but warm. I've been thinking about our conversation, about the choice you have to make. Martin sat down heavily on Rose's back porch steps, suddenly exhausted by the weight of decisions still to come. It's more complicated than I thought. I discovered that my business partners have been lying to me. The whole project is built on fraud. Are you going to expose them? Yes, but it means you're finally choosing to be the person I always hoped you could be. Sarah interrupted. Dad, I'm proud of you. The words hit Martin harder than any business deal ever had. You don't understand what this will cost. I understand perfectly. It's going to cost you everything you spent 30 years accumulating. And it's going to give you back everything you lost while you were accumulating it. They talked for another 30 minutes, Sarah sharing details about her life, that she'd never felt safe, telling him before her fears about becoming a mother, her husband's struggles starting his own business, the way she'd learned to find joy in ordinary moments rather than extraordinary achievements. I want you to meet David, she said, as their conversation wound down. And I want our baby to know their grandfather. The real one. Not the man who was too busy building an empire. To notice he already had everything he needed. After the call ended, Martin found Anna in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a small notebook in her lap. She was writing carefully, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. What are you working on? He asked, settling into Rose's worn armchair. My prayer journal, Anna said without looking up. I write down everyone I want to pray for and what I want God to help them with. Martin felt his throat tighten. Am I in there? Anna looked up with those serious brown eyes. Of course. You've been on the first page since we met. What do you pray for me about? Anna consulted her notebook solemnly. I pray that God will help you not be sad anymore, and that you'll find what you're looking for, and that you'll know how much Jesus loves you, even when you feel far away from everything good. The simple words, delivered with such innocent certainty, nearly undid him. This child had seen straight to the heart of his struggles, the sadness he carried, the searching that had led him down so many wrong paths, the distance he'd created between himself and everything that mattered. Thank you, Anna. That might be the most important prayer anyone's ever said for me. Anna beamed. Grandma Rose says prayers are like seeds. You plant them with love and trust God to make them grow. That afternoon, Martin met with Pastor Morrison to prepare for what they'd privately begun calling the revelation. The plan was simple, but risky. Martin would call a meeting with his business partners, ostensibly to finalize the development deal. But instead of signing contracts, he would present the evidence of fraud and announce his intention to cooperate with legal authorities. Are you ready for their reaction? Pastor Morrison asked as they sat in his study, going over the timeline one more time. They'll be furious. They'll probably threaten legal action, try to destroy my reputation, cut me out of every deal they can influence. Martin paused, surprised by how little these consequences frightened him now. A week ago, that would have terrified me. Now it feels like freedom. What changed? Martin thought about Anna's prayer journal, about Rose's recipe box full of stories, about Sarah's voice saying she was proud of him for the first time in decades. I remembered what I'd forgotten, that being successful and being significant aren't the same thing. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself was offering encouragement for the difficult day ahead. Martin stood in Rose's kitchen, watching Anna pack her school lunch and chattering about a field trip to the fire station. The domestic normalcy of the scene, the smell of coffee brewing, the sound of Rose humming while she made Anna's sandwich, the golden light streaming through windows that looked out on the community garden, felt more valuable than any portfolio he'd ever managed. Will you be here when I get home from school? Anna asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. Martin knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. I'll be here, Anna. I promise. In fact, I have some very good news to share with you and Grandma Rose when you get home. Really? What kind of good news? The kind that means this neighborhood is going to stay exactly the way it is, full of people who love each other and take care of each other and believe in growing good things together. Anna threw her arms around his neck in a hug that nearly knocked him over. I knew God would help you find what you were looking for. As Martin walked Anna to the school bus stop, he reflected on the courage of this little girl who had approached a stranger with bread and Bibles, trusting that kindness would be met with kindness, that love shared would be love returned. She'd been right, of course. Her simple faith had cracked open something in his heart that 30 years of therapy and self-help books couldn't touch. The business meeting was scheduled for 2:00 at the Cedar Falls Inn. Martin's 3 partners were driving up from Chicago, expecting to finalize contracts and begin demolition planning. Instead, they would find themselves confronting evidence of fraud, community organizing, and the complete moral transformation of their most trusted colleague. Catherine Walsh had assembled a small army of support reporters from 3 regional newspapers, city council members who hadn't been part of the corruption scheme, and representatives from several families who would be affected by the development. The original deed would be presented publicly for the first time in decades, its protections finally restored to the community they were meant to serve. But first, Martin had one more call to make. He pulled out his phone and dialed his daughter's number. Sarah? It's Dad. I wanted you to know in about 4 hours. I'm going to do the right thing. Finally. And I wanted to thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For believing I could be better than I'd become. For loving me enough to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Dad, I love you. Whatever happens today, remember that. As Martin ended the call and headed toward the meeting that would change everything, he carried with him Anna's prayers, Rose's wisdom, Sarah's forgiveness, and Pastor Morrison's gentle guidance. But most of all, he carried the certain knowledge that some victories are won not by conquering others, but by finally conquering the worst parts of ourselves. The conference room at the Cedar Falls Inn felt smaller than Martin remembered. His 3 business partners sat around the polished wooden table with the confident air of men accustomed to getting what they wanted. Richard Caldwell, the senior partner, had already spread out the contracts and was reviewing the final terms with the satisfied expression of a hunter who'd cornered his prey. Excellent work, Martin, Richard said, without looking up from the documents. Clean acquisition, minimal community resistance, perfect timing for spring groundbreaking. This project will be the crown jewel of our portfolio. James Morrison, no. Relation to Pastor Morrison nodded approvingly. The profit margins are even better than projected. Eliminating those affordable housing restrictions really opened up our options. Martin felt his stomach clench at the casual admission. Eliminating the restrictions? Oh, right. The third partner, David Chun, said with a dismissive wave. That was handled months ago. Some old deed nonsense that would have complicated things. Richard's contact at City Hall made sure it disappeared from the relevant files. Richard looked up sharply, noticing Martin's expression. Is there a problem? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just clarifying the details, Martin said carefully, his hand moving to the folder beside his chair. So you all knew about the original deed restrictions? Of course we knew, Richard said impatiently. What's this about, Martin? We've invested too much time and money to start second-guessing ourselves now. Martin opened his folder and placed the photocopy of Jeremiah Millbrook's original deed on the table. The 3 men leaned forward, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern as they recognized the document. Where did you get this? James demanded. From the legal aid attorney representing the neighborhood families. The same attorney who has copies of your correspondence with city officials about consulting fees and file management. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard's face had gone pale, while David nervously adjusted his tie. Only James maintained his composure, though his eyes had hardened with calculation. "Martin, think very carefully about what you're suggesting," James said quietly. "These are serious accusations. Accusations that could destroy all of our careers." "Only if they're true," Martin replied. "Are they true, James?" Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Damn it, Martin. Of course they're true. Do you think deals like this happen in a vacuum? Sometimes you have to grease the wheels to get things moving. It's not personal, it's business." "It's fraud," Martin said simply. "And it's over." He reached into his folder again and pulled out the unsigned demolition contract, the document that would have authorized the destruction of Anna's neighborhood, Rose's community, the garden where children learned that growing meant more than profit. "I'm not signing this," Martin said, placing the contract in the center of the table. "In fact, I'm withdrawing from the project entirely." The three men erupted simultaneously. "You can't be serious after everything we've invested. This is professional suicide, Martin." Richard stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? This project represents 18 months of planning, millions in development costs, relationships with contractors and city officials that took years to build." "I know exactly what I'm throwing away," Martin said calmly. "The question is whether you understand what you're trying to destroy. A rundown neighborhood full of people who can't afford to live anywhere decent." David snapped. "We're offering them far more than their properties are worth. They should be grateful." "Those people include a 7-year-old girl who prays every night for strangers she's met once, a grandmother who keeps recipes and stories about neighbors, helping neighbors through hard times, families who've lived in that neighborhood for generations, who've built something real and lasting and valuable that has nothing to do with property values." James leaned back in his chair, studying Martin with cold calculation. "This is about guilt, isn't it? You're having some kind of midlife crisis, feeling bad about your success. Well, let me tell you something. Martin guilt doesn't pay the bills. Sentiment doesn't build portfolios. You've forgotten who you are." "No," Martin said quietly, standing up from the table. "I finally remembered who I am. And I've remembered what success actually looks like." He gathered his papers, leaving the unsigned contract on the table like an accusation. "You can try to proceed without me," Martin said, pausing at the conference room door. "But I wouldn't recommend it. The legal aid attorney has already filed preliminary injunctions based on the deed violations. The story goes public in tomorrow's newspaper, and I'll be cooperating fully with any investigation into fraudulent practices." Richard's voice shook with fury. "We'll destroy you for this, Martin. We'll make sure you never work in this industry again." Martin turned back to face the three men who had been his partners, his colleagues, his definition of success for more than a decade. "You can't destroy what I've already chosen to leave behind," he said. "And you can't touch what I've finally decided to build." As he walked out of the Cedar Falls Inn and into the afternoon sunlight, Martin Hale felt lighter than he had in 30 years. The news broke faster than Martin had expected. By evening, reporters were calling his cell phone. His former partners were issuing threatening statements through their lawyers, and the story of the millionaire who turned against his own development deal was spreading through Cedar Falls like wildfire. Martin sat on Rose's front porch, watching Anna color in a homemade get-well card at the small table they'd set up beside the swing. The card showed a stick-figure family holding hands. Anna had explained that it included Grandma, Rose, herself, Mr. Martin, and Jesus, all together under a rainbow. "Who's the card for, sweetheart?" Rose asked from her chair, where she was bundled in a quilt despite the warm evening. "Mrs. Martinez. Her husband is still in the hospital, and I thought she might need a reminder that she's not alone." Rose had and feeling poorly for the past 2 days, more tired than usual, her breathing labored, her color pale. Martin had quietly arranged for Dr. Henderson to make a house call that afternoon, and the news hadn't been encouraging. Rose's heart was struggling, weakened by years of stress and inadequate medical care she couldn't afford. "Grandma Rose," Anna said, looking up from her coloring, "are you going to be okay?" "I'm going to be just fine, little one," Rose said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. God has perfect timing for everything. Martin's phone buzzed with another call from a reporter, but he let it go to voicemail. Nothing the outside world wanted to know seemed as important as this moment, this little girl making a card for a neighbor, this grandmother finding peace and faith despite physical suffering, this porch where community was measured in kindness rather than property values. Around 8 o'clock, a car pulled up to the curb. Martin tensed, expecting another reporter or perhaps lawyers representing his former partners. Instead, he watched Sarah step out of a rental car, followed by a tall man with kind eyes and gentle hands who had to be David, her husband. Anna looked up from her card as the couple approached the porch. "Grandma Rose, we have visitors." Martin stood slowly, his heart pounding. Sarah climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of him, her expression unreadable. "Hi, Dad." "Sarah, I didn't know you were coming. I saw the news story online about what you did today." She paused, studying his face. "I wanted to see for myself if it was real." Martin gestured toward the modest surroundings, the patched porch, the simple furniture, the little girl coloring by lamplight. "It's real, all of it. More real than anything I've done in 30 years. David stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Hale, I'm David Richardson. It's an honor to meet you." The simple courtesy, the lack of judgment, the respect in David's voice nearly undid Martin. This man knew the worst about him, knew how badly he'd failed as a father, yet was offering friendship without condition. Anna had been watching the exchange with bright curiosity. "Mr. Martin, is this your family?" "Yes," Martin said, his voice thick with emotion. "Anna, I'd like you to meet my daughter Sarah and her husband David." Anna immediately abandoned her coloring and bounded over to Sarah. "Are you really Mr. Martin's daughter? He talks about you all the time. He says you help sick children get better, just like Jesus did." Sarah knelt down to Anna's level, smiling genuinely for the first time since arriving. "That's what I try to do." "And who are you?" "I'm Anna Marie Patterson. This is my Grandma Rose, and this is our house. Mr. Martin has been staying with us while he helps save our neighborhood from getting torn down." Sarah looked up at Martin with something like wonder in her eyes. "He saved your neighborhood?" "Oh, yes. He stopped some bad men who wanted to knock down all our houses." Grandma Rose says he chose love over money, which is the hardest choice grown-ups ever have to make. That evening, after Anna had gone to bed, and Rose had retired early with another bout of breathlessness, Martin sat with Sarah and David on the front porch. The conversation was careful. At first, 20 years of distance couldn't be erased in a single evening, but gradually became more natural. "Dad, I need to tell you something," Sarah said as the night grew deeper. "I've been angry at you for so long I'd forgotten there was anything else to feel. But watching you with Anna, seeing how Rose talks about you, reading about what you gave up today, I'm starting to remember why I loved you so much when I was little." "I'm not the same man who hurt you," Martin said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever make up for the years I lost, the choices I made, the father I failed to be." "Maybe making up for it isn't the point," David said gently. "Maybe the point is what you choose to do from here forward." Sarah reached over and took Martin's hand, the first time they touched in 15 years. "I want our baby to know their grandfather, the real one, the one who learned that saving a little girl's neighborhood matters more than saving face." As they sat together in the gentle darkness, Martin felt something he'd thought was lost forever, The possibility of family, of forgiveness, of a future built on love rather than achievement. Anna's prayer journal lay on the table beside them, still open to the page where she'd written his name in careful letters, still believing in miracles, still trusting that God could change even the hardest hearts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: legal proceedings, financial consequences, the difficult work of rebuilding a life on different foundations. But tonight, on this porch where community mattered more than commerce, Martin Hale was finally home. 6 months later, Martin Hale stood in the Millbrook community garden, watching Anna help plant the spring vegetables that would feed the neighborhood. Through another season, the little girl had grown taller over the winter, but her spirit remained unchanged, still generous, still joyful, still believing in the power of love to transform anything it touched. "Mr. Martin," Anna called from where she was carefully placing tomato seedlings in neat rows. "Come see how big Mrs. Chun's cabbage got over the winter." Martin walked over to admire the impressive heads of cabbage that had somehow survived the harsh January freeze. Mrs. Chun beamed with pride as she explained her grandmother's techniques for winter gardening, techniques she was now teaching to Anna and the other neighborhood children. The garden had expanded significantly since the development threat ended. With the land permanently protected under the restored deed restrictions, families felt secure enough to invest time and resources in long-term improvements. New plots had been added, a small greenhouse constructed, and a children's section established, where Anna conducted informal lessons on growing things with love. Martin's own life had changed just as dramatically. The legal aftermath of exposing the development fraud had been swift and severe. His former partners faced criminal charges for bribery and document falsification. His own company had dissolved, his Manhattan penthouse sold, his investment portfolio liquidated to cover legal fees and settlements. By any measure he'd once used to define success, Martin Hale was now a failure. Yet he'd never felt more successful in his life. The simple business card in his wallet read, "Martin Hale, Community Advocate." He'd founded a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting affordable housing and supporting community development projects. The work paid a fraction of what he'd once earned, but it paid in ways that mattered more than money. Thank you letters from families who'd kept their homes, invitations to neighborhood barbecues, the trust of children who saw him as someone who kept promises. "Dad, the contractor says they can start on the community center next month." Martin turned to see Sarah approaching, her pregnancy now obvious under her loose spring dress. She and David had moved to Cedar Falls 3 months ago, Sarah taking a position at the regional medical center, while David started a consulting practice that served small towns across the Midwest. They bought a house 6 blocks from Rose and Anna, close enough to help, far enough to maintain independence. "That's wonderful news," Martin said, accepting the glass of lemonade Sarah offered. "Anna will be so excited. She's been planning the children's programs since we first talked about the center." The community center was Martin's latest project, a multi-purpose facility that would house after-school programs, senior services, job training classes, and community meetings. Funded through grants, Martin had learned to write with the same intensity he'd once brought to investment proposals. The center represented everything the original development had threatened to destroy. "How's Rose doing today?" Sarah asked, settling into a garden chair that neighbors had placed in the shade for visitors. "Better. The new medication seems to be helping with her breathing." Martin's voice carried the careful optimism of someone who'd learned that improvement was precious and fragile. She was up early making cookies for Anna's school fundraiser. Rose's health had become the neighborhood's shared concern over the winter. When her medical bills mounted beyond what anyone could manage, families had quietly organized bringing meals, offering transportation to appointments, taking turns sitting with her when Anna was at school. Martin had arranged for the best cardiac specialists But he'd learned that Rose's true medicine was the community that surrounded her with love. Speaking of Anna, Sarah said, she asked me something yesterday that I thought you should know about. What's that? She wanted to know if our baby would be her cousin. When I explained that you're not really her grandfather, she looked very serious and said that families aren't just about blood. They're about people who choose to love each other. Sarah smiled, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Then she asked if she could teach the baby about gardening and praying for people and sharing bread with neighbors. Martin felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 6 months, Anna had taught him more about family than he'd learned in 58 years of trying to understand it. She'd shown him that love multiplied when shared. That community was built one relationship at a time, that the most important investments were measured in trust rather than dollars. What did you tell her? I told her that would be perfect. That our baby couldn't ask for a better teacher. As the afternoon wore on, neighbors drifted through the garden checking on plants, sharing news, simply enjoying the company of people who'd chosen to build something beautiful together. Mr. Thompson stopped by with fresh coffee for the workers. Mrs. Martinez brought her famous empanadas to share. The O'Brien teenagers helped Anna water the new seedlings with the serious attention that children reserve for truly important tasks. Pastor Morrison arrived around 5 o'clock, as he did most evenings, to offer a blessing for the day's work and the community's continued growth. As neighbors gathered in a loose circle, holding hands for the simple prayer that had become their tradition, Martin found himself standing between Anna and Sarah, part of a family he'd never imagined possible. Thank you, God, for this good earth and for the hands that tend it, Pastor Morrison said in his gentle voice. Thank you for neighbors who become family, for second chances, and for the courage to choose love over fear, community over profit, hope over despair. As the prayer ended and neighbors began to disperse toward their evening routines, Anna tugged on Martin's sleeve. Mr. Martin, I made something for you. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, another drawing, this one showing the garden in full summer bloom, with stick figures of all the neighborhood families working together under a bright yellow sun. It's for your office, Anna explained, seriously. So, you'll remember that growing good things is the most important work there is. Martin knelt down and gathered the little girl into a hug. This child who'd changed his life with bread and Bibles, who taught him that true wealth was measured in love shared rather than money accumulated. I'll never forget, he promised. And Anna, thank you. For what? For showing me what I was really looking for all along. As Martin walked home to the small apartment he now rented 3 blocks from the garden, Anna's drawing carefully folded in his shirt pocket. It reflected on the strange mathematics of redemption. He'd lost everything the world told him to value and gained everything his soul had always needed. He'd discovered that some victories were won not by conquering others, but by finally conquering the worst parts of yourself. The evening light was soft and golden, painting the neighborhood in the gentle colors of hope fulfilled. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour, marking not just the end of another day, but the continuation of a story that had begun with a millionaire's broken heart and a little girl's unshakable faith. And in that faith, Martin had finally found his way home.